Hello, everyone. This is the 258th episode of Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog. For this episode, I interview English author Mr. Will Dalton as we discuss his book, O San Lorenzo, A Journey Through Argentine Football Culture. Welcome, Will.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
Thank you. So, can you introduce yourself and your trajectory into football?
Yeah, so I'm Will, and I've been a writer kind of for all my adult life, really. Started out as a journalist, and then kind of been a writer in different guises, but I've always kind of done, I guess, passion projects on the side, writing for kind of magazines and Charlton fanzines, Charlton being my club in England. And after being based in Argentina over a couple of trips for about a year and a half and spending a lot of time in the rest of the continent, I felt there was a book in Argentine football culture through the lens of San Lorenzo, which is the team I follow over there. And that's how the book came about. And it was, released at the end of last year.
So, before we begin with the football, what was your journey and reasons that initially led you to Argentina?
Well, back then I was just sort of a younger lad in my early 20s who wanted to learn a bit of Spanish because I sort of stupidly didn't really take any interest in languages at school, being a bit young and naive and ignorant. And fancied kind of discovering another city, discovering another culture, learning a bit of Spanish. After a bit of thinking, I landed on Buenos Aires in Argentina. And I'm so glad I did because, fell in love with that city. It's now my favorite city in the world, even though I'm a proud Londoner. Grew up a bit further south, but I do love where I'm based. But Buenos Aires is pretty special. Football's a massive part of that. And an initial 6 month spell living over there turned into a kind of a full year after that. And now I kind of go back for as long as possible whenever I can. Not always easy with work and travel expenses and the like. But Buenos Aires is always kind of calling me.
Most European football fans' knowledge of Argentine football is usually limited to Buenos Aires' big two, Boca Juniors and River Plate. Therefore, can you walk us through the process that led to your devotion to San Lorenzo?
There, San Lorenzo's got an interesting parallel with the club that I've always supported in England, Charlton Athletic, currently in the second tier, the Championship. The thing that defines Charlton most of all, in terms of our modern history at least, is this exile away from our home stadium in the 1980s, the Valley in southeast London. The club was in a mess and we had to play in other stadiums nearby, like Crystal Palace and West Ham. But it was a kind of unique fan campaign which eventually got us home. The fans formed a political party, ran against the British establishment, won 15,000 votes in local elections in London. And with that kind of gained influence in the local area, we managed to get home in 1992. And the Valley, our home, has this added sentimentality because of what we went through and how we had to fight to get back there. San Lorenzo went through something pretty similar at the end of the 1970s, a kind of a darker element to it, in the sense that San Lorenzo lost their stadium, the Gasómetro, in their neighborhood of Boedo in Buenos Aires, under the military dictatorship in Argentina, which didn't sort of look at San Lorenzo's history of kind of rebellion and leftist elements of their support too fondly. And that was part of the reason why they kind of put pressure on the club to leave their dilapidated stadium and eventually kind of, seized the land and the property for a cut down price, and San Lorenzo never got back home. There's been loads of fan campaigns similar to the Charlton ones I described, but so far without the happy ending. But I felt very kind of moved by their story and their longing to return home, that I had an interest in San Lorenzo because of that. I started going to games and I fell in love straight away. And it became a regular thing for me to go home and away whenever I could.
For those unfamiliar, can you give a background to the history of San Lorenzo and its status in the Argentine football landscape?
Of course. So San Lorenzo is one of the big five in Argentina, the Cinco Grandes, as they call them. You rightly mentioned Boca and River, who everyone is very familiar with, or most people are. And then below them, you've probably got Independiente in third, and then Racing Club and San Lorenzo battle it out probably for that fourth spot, even if San Lorenzo fans would probably claim the third place overall. And they've got a very interesting origin story. It was founded or kind of co-founded by a Catholic priest in 1908. because he saw outside his church a group of youngsters playing in the street because they had nowhere else to play, as a lot of kids did in kind of early 20th century Buenos Aires. We saw one of the children nearly got knocked over by a tram. It was a busy, dangerous street. He thought, this can't go on. This isn't safe for these kids. And so he said to them, if you boys come to mass on a Sunday, you can play in the church grounds. I've got space here. You can have a proper little pitch and play more seriously. And that ultimately is what gave birth to the club. By 1908, they kind of formalized their team and became San Lorenzo de Almagro. And yeah, did become a bit of a giant alongside Brocken River in those early decades. Probably fell away kind of towards the mid decades of the 20th century as like Brocken River really kind of came to the fore. But yeah, stayed one of those, the Cinco Grandes, the big five. And yeah, has relative success, but as kind of in the middle of a bad decade or so at the moment due to a lot of off-field problems. But a very special club with big support all over Argentina.
In your book, you emphasize the importance of Barrio de Boedo, where the team is originally from. Can you discuss its importance in socio-historical terms?
Yes, Boedo, the neighbourhood, is really important to the club. As my friend often tells me, he's a playwright himself, quite a poetic man. He says San Lorenzo is Boedo and Boedo is San Lorenzo. The neighbourhood and the club are intrinsically linked. I think that adds to this sense of belonging in that area and that yearning to build the stadium in that barrio once again, where they don't currently play. It's kind of made the fan base at San Lorenzo particularly creative. They've always had this reputation for creating the best songs, the songs that spread all over the continent and the world, and bringing a lot of trends to the Argentine terraces. Even if we go way back to kind of the Barra Brava hooligan, like throwing the ticker tape and the songs that welcome out the team and all that kind of stuff. And people argue that that creativity came from the culture of Boedo, which is always, it was kind of a lower middle class, working class neighborhood of writers, of playwrights, of sculptors, of dancers, a lot of tango halls, really rich culturally. And people think, and then there's a lot of evidence for it, that really kind of imbued the personality of the club and the supporters. And to this day, they are known as, yeah, the most creative, the kind of the masters of the songbook, which is a very important thing in Argentina, because if anyone who's kind of dropped into little videos on YouTube of Argentine support or seen the Argentina fans at World Cups or Copa Americas, sees their big and passionate support, but it's also the melody of their singing and these long kind of verses and chorus that goes into it. It's a whole thing. And San Lorenzo's being the master of that is a kind of big part of their identity, I suppose.
In your book, you use local terms like cuervo, hinchada, barras bravas, cargada, as in Mr. Christopher Hyland's book, Dame Bola. Is the language and lexicon of football paramount in understanding this fan culture?
I think it is. I think it is. And I think that's exactly why Chris wrote that book. I was very lucky enough to play football with Chris back when I lived in Buenos Aires. He's a very good player as well as being an excellent writer. And yeah, I think he really cottoned onto something that to get the real feel of the essence of the game over there, you do have to kind of get in touch with the terminology a bit. For example, an hincha, as they call a fan, is different to what Spain would call it, despite speaking the same language. They call it an aficionado. And you are kind of more of an aficionado in Spain because you kind of consume it slightly more passively. They're your club, they're your team, you hope they win, but you sit there in a slightly more relaxed, nevertheless kind of engaged manner. In Argentina, hincha comes from hinchar, which comes to sort of inflate and push on and lift your team. And that's probably why they are so active. And they've got this history of, being kind of relentless with their support. They've got this term aguante, which doesn't even exist in English, which is all about kind of endurance and strength to kind of stand there in the heat or the rain or whatever it is for 90 minutes plus, because they're often in the ground 2 hours before that, singing and banging the drums, etc., to show that kind of support to your team through thick and thin, whatever's happening, and also off the pitch to be able to stand up to other kind of supporters and defend your neighborhood and maybe even defend other fans and defend your team, as because things often do get or did get very hostile in Argentine football. So they've got that kind of strength and slightly aggressive element to it as well. So that's just a couple of terms, hincha and aguante, which don't translate directly, that you kind of do have to understand to get a feel of it. I'd probably throw in Barra Brava as well, just to give one more, because people say that they're the hooligans or the ultras. That's not quite right. It's not quite the same culture in terms of how they support nor the kind of more aggressive elements of it. So yeah, to get under the skin of the game, I think it's well worth knowing a few of those terms. And I try to bring them in to my book without kind of overwhelming the text with Spanish. But yeah, we would really recommend Dami Bola, which is Chris's book, as well as Tears at the Bombonera, which is a fantastic travel log, which goes through a lot of football grounds in South America.
Speaking of football grounds, can you describe the match going experience as well as the pre-match build-up and rituals? And how would you contrast it, say, with the English match going experience?
In England, there's probably a bit less to it from a supporter point of view in terms of I still start early, like a lot of fans do in England. I go to the pub quite early and see my friends and family, but you kind of maximize that time right until kickoff. You kind of, we escape the pub at maybe 10 to 3, 10 minutes before kickoff in the UK, get into a seat and right, referee blows the whistle and away you go. Whereas in Argentina, the previa, as they call their pre-drink, another useful term, is about generating the support already, kind of 2, 3, 4 hours before kickoff. People are out there with their drums as they kind of share the drinks and they're singing the songs. They might even be kind of welcoming the team bus in. Perhaps they've even begun the day before with a banderazo, which Newell's Roll Boys are very famous for. They always do before their derby against Rosario Central. They pack out their stadium just to see off the team ahead of that big game. So it can start as early as 24 hours before a game. So you've got that massive build up before with the previa. At San Lorenzo, it's all about the band, which congregates under their main end, which creates a kind of concrete amphitheater. It's almost like being at a concert before a game. So it really builds and builds and builds before you get the crescendo of the recibimiento, the reception of when the teams come out the tunnel and you see those classic scenes of the ticker tape flying in the air, the fans bouncing on the spot and singing their chants, flares and smoke grenades going up. So yeah, it's a very kind of active and exuberant way of supporting. And yeah, it really does take place over a long period of time rather than just maybe, bombing into the ground after your pints, as is often the case in the UK.
The terrace culture is also unique and a spectacle in itself, with banners and flags and showmanship. I imagine that's an experience that can only be felt if you're inside it, inside the stadium.
Yeah, no, I think that's very fair to say. I think nowadays, in the last 10 years or so, people have become more acquainted with those scenes because of social media, because of the availability of online video, that you see, oh, wow, look at the Bombonera and look at the Monumental for those big games. But it's extremely sensorial when you're there and you get all these extra layers that you would never get to seeing those videos, from the smell in the air of the smoke and the marijuana, which often people are smoking, that still hangs over the end, which adds this kind of intoxicating feel, often in an Argentine end. The vibration of the drums and the band, it becomes extremely visceral because it's not just the music and the rhythm for the singing. It rocks the terraces and you feel it all around you. And there's a common saying at Boca that the terrace shakes. You feel it underneath your foot. And I've felt that at San Lorenzo as well. When everyone's bouncing as one to those songs, the concrete does tremble beneath you. It's quite frightening. I had friends who've gone with me to games and found it very unnerving. But there's just another thing that you feel and you won't be able to capture if you're not there. And then I guess the sort of the camaraderie that goes with it as well. Despite being quite intimidating, and it's despite its history of violence, in my experience, have found it a very inclusive space. People love to have you there as an outsider. If you're showing the intrigue and interest in their clubs and their culture, they're happy to bring you in and teach you the songs and bring you into the fold like that. So yeah, there's definitely lots to be felt beyond just seen, and I think that's why a lot of trips to Argentina and neighboring countries are so popular, kind of based on ground hopping and living that experience, because it is quite distinct and quite special when you do get to be there.
In your book, you discuss how San Lorenzo are renowned for their terrace songs throughout Argentina. Can you discuss this aspect of San Lorenzo and Argentina with songs that are part paying homage to their history, part insulting the opponent, but it's always a unique part of the culture?
It is. It really is. And I think, as I mentioned, that the background of Boedo, that neighborhood, is really important to that of kind of building this kind of creativity and almost artistry into their support. And yeah, they're full songs. They're not just chants, quick bursts of shouts, which you might get in the UK and Europe, that They're often 3 or 4 verses, choruses thrown in, all the instrumentation that comes part of it. The music influenced by the murga, which is a kind of carnival music, very closely associated with Uruguay. And it's got kind of a lot of African instrumentation and rhythms to it, but with that kind of mix of Latin America in there as well, which creates a very kind of cool audio experience, if you like. And yeah, you speak to any fan these days of associated with other clubs, and they might have their issues with San Lorenzo, but they will always admit that they are the masters of the songbook, and that's where the most of the chants tend to begin. And now you'll hear kind of loads of them in Spain, from that team name Mi Buen Amigo, which you hear a lot and all around the world, that originated in San Lorenzo in the 1970s, to more kind of, yeah, to a lot of the songs you hear Argentina at the World Cup. They're very famous for singing Brazil, Tell Me How It Feels, at the 2014 World Cup. Brasil, decime que se siente. And that was another San Lorenzo original with different words, obviously. So, yeah, these elements are really important to Argentine football. And I think San Lorenzo is very proud to be the pioneer of a lot of it.
So the insults are more like banter, basically, right?
They are, and that is definitely a big part of it as well. You will get these long, kind of earnest, kind of almost romantic songs dedicated to the club, but you get a lot of back and forth as well, and hyper specific songs for each club and fan base. Like San Lorenzo will have a very different kind of insult for a Boca Juniors fan as they will for a River Plate fan. There's a big song that talks about how River Plate, it was the military generals which funded their stadium, and the average River Plate fan just sits at home watching on TV and they'll never truly understand what passion is. And this is all built into the chanting. These days, sadly, because now we've gone over a decade of away fans being banned across league games in Argentina, bar a few exceptions, the back and forth of the insults which have been created on the spot, which is such an important part of terrace culture, I'd say all around the world, has died off a bit, because there's usually only one set of fans in the ground, which is a very sad thing. But nevertheless, in the background, there are all kinds of songs being created, which some are very, can be abusive and can shine a light on the darker parts of Argentine society. And I think in the book, I was very keen to not just talk about football, but to think how football helps us understand the country and Argentine people. And there's a lot in my book of celebrating how kind of ingenious and how faithful the San Lorenzo support is. But when they play Boca Juniors, for example, you get some really quite xenophobic, pretty racist chanting against them as well. Kind of, they're all working class, therefore got this kind of Bolivian or Paraguayan heritage, and those nationalities are used in a xenophobic way as an insult towards Boca fans, which is speaks to kind of an ugliest side of a lot of attitudes in Argentina. So I wanted to have that critical lens as well, and there's a chapter dedicated to that. So yeah, you do get a bit of everything, and you do learn a lot about the people and the country, for good and bad, via those chants.
An important aspect of your book deals with the closing of San Lorenzo's historical stadium that you mentioned earlier, Viejo Gasometro, in 1979. That led to sharing stadiums in the subsequent years, and of course, until the opening of the new stadium, Nuevo Gasometro, in a different neighborhood in 1993. This relocation, as you point out, did not sit well with the faithful, who yearned a return to the historical neighborhood of Buedo. Can you discuss this struggle that has lasted for decades?
I can, and I think it's a very painful struggle for the San Lorenzo fan, because it came at a time when they couldn't really put up a fight to keep their home, because it happened, as I said, under the military generals in late 70s Argentina, when going out on the street and protesting would mean arrest, potentially disappearance, potentially being tortured. You might end up as one of the estimated 30,000 who effectively disappeared underneath the military generals in Argentina during the dictatorship. And the circumstances were very controversial, and I think the dislike that a lot of the military generals had for San Lorenzo probably played a part in it. A few years before they lost their stadium, there was one of the most famous protests of Las Madres, the mothers of Plaza de Mayo, who are famed for their white headscarves and circling the plaza every single week, calling for the appearance and the whereabouts of their disappeared children. That began during the dictatorship and still continues to this day, because there are so many people whose deaths haven't been kind of traced and identified. And those madres, the gasometro in Boedo, they hung a huge banner outside the stadium facing the main road. And yeah, they did it with a lot of fear. They had to do it with careful planning undercover to not get caught. But it was a very public demonstration that, yeah, would not, the association with San Lorenzo wasn't looked on favorably by the military dictatorship at all. Throw in the financial problems that the club had, the fact that the stadium was made of wood at a time when stadiums were getting modernized ahead of the Argentina World Cup in 1978. Some pretty poor owners who are happy to kind of make a fast buck. And yeah, the club was eventually maneuvered out of their stadium, forced to share with local rivals, and before eventually building a new stadium in a neighbouring barrio just down the road. But yeah, it's a fantastic home, and they've really made it home. But there's still these ongoing campaigns to get back to Boedo, and home will only truly be home when they are eventually back there, whenever that may be.
Yeah, and in your book, you go through the whole process of how the old location became a supermarket. Eventually, the fans had to petition the politicians basically to get the land back, but even that hasn't really resolved the problem to this day. So, yeah, I urge everyone to read this whole process that you go through for San Lorenzo and their historical ground. How significant was the Copa Libertadores victory in 2014 as the one important trophy that had eluded the club, while so many others like Boca, River, Independiente had already won it before?
Yeah, no, it was massively significant. It was a bit of a monkey on the back of San Lorenzo for its existence, really. People used to use the kind of initials of the club to say Club Atlético San Lorenzo sin Libertadores. They changed the name San Lorenzo without Libertadores, kind of the only big club in the country which still hadn't managed to win the Champions League equivalent, the biggest trophy, which I think almost has a slightly elevated status even above the Champions League. There's kind of this extra mystique to the Copa Libertadores. One Boca fan described it to me as because there's just so much that goes into winning it. He said it's like the Tour de France of football because you have to go and play in Quito and La Paz, where the altitude might be 3,000 or 4,000 meters above sea level, and players getting oxygen masks on the side. You'll go to Brazil and there's people staying up all night to let off fireworks outside your hotel and keep you awake. You might go to another ground where the police are invading the pitch and smashing you with batons after a fracas on the pitch. It kind of, there's so much against you, there's so much goes into it that you really do feel like you're conquering a continent with that. So as well as the football element, you've got that extra kind of mystique to the Libertadores. But San Lorenzo just couldn't do it, and it was only coincidence or otherwise when the Pope, Papa Francisco, Pope Francis, a San Lorenzo fan, came to the Vatican, came to power in 2013. San Lorenzo instantly went from a relegation threatened club to the league winners. They won the title in late 2013, and 6 months later they won the Copa Libertadores. So for a very Catholic country and a superstitious country, I think that sequence of events was pretty significant. And the club sort of celebrating as it did for kind of weeks on end. It was such a big thing. Took the trophy out to the Vatican to present it to the Pope. And yeah, my friends who were there at the game, I saw every single game of that Libertadores run up to the semi-final. Unfortunately missed out on the semi-final and the final. But yeah, friends were there to say it was just the most emotional thing. I've seen videos at full time and people aren't really shouting and bouncing and screaming like you expect in Argentina. They're all just sort of heads buried in hands and shoulders. They're all crying. They were kind of overcome by the emotion of it and finally winning this trophy that it was too much for a lot of people. But yeah, a beautiful moment in the club's history and yeah, very significant.
Is part of the appeal of the club all the struggles that the club has encountered over the decades? Does this forge a bond between the public and the club?
I think it definitely does. I think it definitely does. And the public know that they've had to save the club because when San Lorenzo lost the stadium, they also got relegated. The club was on the brink of kind of going bust, of not existing as a club. But the fans, rather than kind of drifting and lamenting, doubled down and they packed out the stadiums in the second tier, broke all kinds of records. They filled the Monumental River Stadium of, at the time, 75,000 for a B League game against Tigre. And then they played in other grounds like Vélez Sarsfield, and they were sold it out and they were selling more tickets than Vélez were for their own games. And Vélez fans were becoming San Lorenzo fans because they had these incredible San Lorenzo parties in their backyard. And they say that the Vélez president said, right, we can't have San Lorenzo playing here anymore because they're kind of stealing our support. That's kind of one of the anecdotes of the time. And so the fans really showed up. And obviously having this extra kind of investment in the club struggle with the trying to get the return to Boedo to build the stadium. There have been mass protests out on the streets, movements for the return. 100,000 people gathered in the middle of the city in 2010, I think it was, in the Plaza de Mayo for the support for going back to Boedo. They've also bought symbolic square meters of the plot of the land in Boedo to try and build a new stadium, which succeeded, or partially succeeded, in getting rid of the Carrefour supermarket, which was there, which tragically replaced the stadium. So there's been so much investment, emotional, financial, from the fans that they are so kind of involved with it. I mean, every fan feels that kind of stake with their club, but there's been so much in this kind of turbulent history of San Lorenzo, which kind of accentuates that even more, I think, and which does create a distinct kind of personality in terms of perhaps the creativity of the chants and the pain and the longing, but the dedication to always be there as well.
Two of San Lorenzo's most famous supporters have been the late Pope Francis and Hollywood star Viggo Mortensen. How has that helped the club's visibility globally?
A lot. I mean, as I mentioned, the Pope might even be responsible for a couple of trophies, considering that the fortunes increased or took such an upturn after he arrived in the Vatican. And yeah, people would always go there to the Vatican with their San Lorenzo colours, and he would wave the flags and say "Que gane San Lorenzo," like "Come on, San Lorenzo." So that's, yeah, you don't get much bigger than that in terms of sort of an ambassador for the club. And then Viggo Mortensen, brilliant, like a real proper fan. He spent his childhood in Buenos Aires despite being a Dane, and yeah, shows up regularly in the red carpet with San Lorenzo badges stitched into his suits, kind of red and blue, the club's colours lining on his clothes, sometimes just a flag draped around him as he goes down the red carpet. So yeah, he's very visible in his support. He's also snuck San Lorenzo props into the set in certain films to get extra visibility there. So yeah, he takes that very seriously. Quoted as saying that success for San Lorenzo is much more important than him winning an Oscar. He'd much rather a trophy for the club. So he's a diehard Cuervo, to use San Lorenzo's nickname, a crow. And yeah, definitely good from a visibility point of view.
In closing, your support for San Lorenzo has clearly impacted your life. As you look back at your trajectory of a Cuervo and eventually a socio, what stands out for you in this personal journey?
I'd say probably a sense of belonging and being part of something. Because when I go somewhere, and I've been fortunate to travel a fair bit, when you really like a place, you kind of want to feel part of it. Maybe you're out on, I don't know, out on the street, outside a bar, having a drink, and everyone's kind of chattering around you, or maybe some music's playing and people are singing along. You love what you're seeing and feeling, and you love the energy of it, but you don't fully feel part of it. And I fell in love with Buenos Aires completely. But when I first moved there, I didn't speak much Spanish, and it was hard to really get beyond and being friends with kind of fellow foreigners. I didn't have his life until I started going regularly, making trips like to Morocco for the Club World Cup, where I met some really good friends I still have to this day, and various other trips to Chile and all across Argentina. You really do feel part of something. I learned the songs as a way of learning Spanish. As I say, my kind of all my Argentine friends, bar a small handful, are from San Lorenzo. So it really gave me a sense of, yeah, being part of something, being part of their society. And as an Englishman in Argentina, you know, we haven't got the best history, especially after the Malvinas, Falklands War in the 80s and stuff. But those kind of potential barriers just fall away when you're there with your fellow fans on the terraces. And yeah, from a personal point of view, that's probably the most significant part.
With that, I would like to thank you for your participation in this interview. All our respective contact information and the links to Mr. Dalton's book, again, O San Lorenzo, A Journey Through Argentine Football Culture, is listed on the blog and podcast uploads. So, Will, thank you once again and hope to continue these discussions on football history.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed the conversation. Cheers.
Thank you.